Welcome to DWP 2022. We're on episode 10 today, discussing African unity and Pan-Africanism. 101, because it's a bit of a lecture, but the historical evolution of Pan-Africanism and African unity to BRAND AFRIKA. So, say season 2022 is all about whoever Africa runs this world, and therefore, as Africans, learn how to control our resources and our systems, will definitely be the next economic superpower after China, following the United States. So in the last 3 episodes, just to recap, 7 and 8, we were really focused on Brand Afrika. And remember, we kept saying, modernize, don't westernize Africa, as the Kralian call. And in episode 9, we went further to then distinguish Western-style modernity to African-style modernity, because the use of the term modernize can be used in various ways. And I think we were able to not only show that Africans have always been at the center of modernizing all of civilization from the very beginning of human civilization. It started in Africa, exported through Egypt to Europe, all the way back to where we are today. But the modern economy as it is now, we agreed. African slaves in the southern part of the US were almost central to the creation of today's modern economy. And we now talk about why westernization, before we put in place our own systems, has led to a lot of frustration by Africans, feelings of alienation, roots are disappearing, and our strong bonds in family and community are eroded. Meanwhile, the economies are not growing and we are suffering. So that's why in today's session, we want to go a lot further in bringing other elements that impact on Brand Afrika. And the whole issue of Pan-Africanism, African unity, is key, in my opinion, to providing further pathways towards a uniquely advanced. And I would say that today it's very clear, more and more Africans do realize that the colonial project to westernize Africa failed. And therefore, there are greater and greater calls. Both young generations and older generations are calling for Africa to define itself much more clearly, culturally, politically, economically. So this is why Pan-Africanism is a key thing. And we are going to go through the history of Pan-Africanism just to expose ourselves to how it all happened and how it's happening now, and some nuances between, Pan-Africanism, the original, as a vis-a-vis what we see today as attempts to unite governmental structures into African unity. So my name is Mandi Rukuni. I authored this book, Being African, which I'm recommending to you. You stand a chance of winning a copy of this book in the DWP competitions. But I wrote this book primarily because we Africans often confuse westernization with modernization. So this book goes through what it takes for us to modernize Africa using our heritage rather than westernizing it. So who knew Ubuntu, Udugu is what this book is about. I recommend it to you highly, and those who want the practical side of how to succeed using heritage values, you can go to the small handbook of African Pathways to Success. Look forward to you participating in the competition. Thank you.
Stand a chance to win a copy of the book Being African or the booklet African Pathways to Success by subscribing to our YouTube channel Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni and leaving a comment on one of our recent videos. You can also like our Facebook page and comment on a recent post. If you're on Instagram, follow the profile Prof Mandi Rukuni and leave a comment on a recent post as well. A random participant will be chosen at the end of the month and will be contacted and given the book.
So let's go to some facts. Here are some of the facts around the evolution of Pan-Africanism and African unity. And, you know, the literature is pregnant. There are many versions. And amongst those, I chose the one I thought really resonated well with what I think has happened, is happening. I'm not a historian myself in the traditional sense of the word. I am not trained in history and stuff like that. I don't need to be. I always say to my family, to my colleagues, today, don't be put in a box. I've refused to be put in a box because I'm trained as a scientist, agriculturalist. So what? I am digging into this Pan-Africanism because it's more important to me, strategically, as opposed to just specializing in one area. And I've looked at Timothy Muridhi's work. He did a brilliant piece of work entitled Contextualizing the Debate on a Union Government for Africa. At the time, he was with the Institute of Security Studies in Addis. So this is a 2008 publication, but it's fantastic. So basically, putting Africanism in 3 stages so far. The first stage is the initial kind of institutionalization of Pan-Africanism itself, which was started in the diaspora well before African countries became independent. In fact, in the 1880s, 1890s, emerged the first associations, the first sets of meetings around Pan-Africanism. And it is very interesting to note that the very first meeting by Pan-Africanists was in 1893, and the meeting was held in Chicago. But all these meetings would also include African scholars and activists. So the Marcus Garveys of this world, central to the diaspora's understanding of Pan-Africanism, always worked with other African intellectual heavyweights, such as the Edward Wilmot Blyden, a Liberian intellectual heavyweight. So this first meeting, 1893 in Chicago, was one of 8 that were to be held, depending on what you read. What I'm citing here is those who have searched and looked for, I think, all of them. I think 8 are on record to have happened up to 1945, once again before any African country became independent from the colonial masters. So you can literally say that Pan-Africanism was being driven institutionally in terms of congresses, meetings, associations, getting organized entirely in the diaspora. These meetings were being held in Paris, in the UK, all over the place, except Africa, because none of the African countries were independent. So that basically tells us the first stage of Pan-Africanism. The second stage, and most historic for us, happens in 1958, because Ghana becomes the first African country to gain independence from the UK. And in 1958, President Kwame Nkrumah at the time Prime Minister of Ghana, hosts the first All Africa People's Conference in Accra.
Our enemies are many, and they stand ready to pounce upon and exploit our every weakness. They play upon our vanities and flatter us in every kind of way. They tell us that this particular person or that particular country has greater or more favorable potentialities than the other. They do not tell us that we should unite, that we are all as good as we are able to make ourselves once we are free.
Historic event. And it was historic in a sense that this is the first time the meeting is held in Africa, on African soil. And the other interesting element is that Kwame Nkrumah provided an incredible focus on Pan-Africanism as a continental idea. He did not see individual colonized countries as the final answer to Pan-Africanism. It was continental in view. And this becomes important because although Ghana became the first country to be independent, by 1963, we're in the second stage, which is the formation of the Organization of African Unity, or OAU, we know that many other countries had become independent by 1963. So at the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, there had been two major opposing views around how Pan-Africanism could be put into effect in Africa. So the OAU eventually was a compromise between those who wanted immediate continental integration, the so-called Casablanca group, of which Kwame Nkrumah was in the lead, and those who saw countries retaining some autonomy, a lot of focus on sovereignty, and then individual nations managing their own internal affairs without any intervention. So that group, the Monrovia group, as it was coined then, really succeeded, and the compromise position was more or less the Monrovia position. But overall, one could say that Ghana attaining independence in 1958 and Kwame Nkrumah providing an incredible, clear vision for Pan-Africanism. By 1963, the formation of the Organization of African Unity had become a purely intergovernmental affair. There was limited participation of what you might call non-government institutions and associations, which had been almost entirely the ones who had pushed the idea of Pan-Africanism in the 19th century all the way up to independence. So that's really the second stage. The third stage follows the demise of the Organization of African Unity. So it ran from 1963 to 2002 and folded up and gave way to the formation of the Africa Union. In this segment, we're not going deeply into the challenges that were faced by the Organization of African Unity for various reasons. The main one of which is, let's look at the evolution. It's not, in my opinion, it's not about passing judgment either on OAU or AU or Kwame Nkrumah's vision and the Casablanca group, or whether that the succeeding compromise position was better, or I think it's neither here or there, because at the end of the day, each still had to face the practicalities of implementing this Pan-Africanism idea. And my own position is clear as Kwame Nkrumah's vision was, and I love it. It's still my position. It's not obvious how easy it was going to implement either. So let's not pass judgment on that at the moment. Let's focus then on the third stage. The Africa Union is formed 2002 at a historic meeting in Durban. So I would still say that the evolution from OAU to AU was still extremely historic and visionary. You know, the AU, as it was being put together in 2002, still was actually pretty distant from Nkrumah's original Pan-Africanist vision. But for me, having seen 40, 50 years of OAU in place, I basically was so happy delighted. I mean, the formation of the AU, distant as it is from the original vision, is still, for me, was lovely, an organismic experience, fantastic. So the third phase with the AU brings us somewhere where it's now possible to see both ways. Look back and see how, do a Sankofa, how we did with OAU, and look forward with much greater clarity what could be achieved. And I'll cover a little bit of that in the analysis when we come back. But needless to say that, in summary, the OAU had not really lived up to the expectations of Africans when it comes to promotion of economic growth, peace, security, and these other unification ideals on the continent. But they succeeded beyond expectation, OAU, in liberating the rest of African countries which had remained under colonial bondage. So there you are. When the AU was established, it had much clearer structures, much more towards the original vision. The Constitutive Act of the Africa Union, which was put together in Togo in 2000, includes so many provisions and institutions to ensure rule of law, democratic governance, and respect to human rights. Article 30 of that Constitutive Act actually forbids any unconstitutional change of government. Brilliant, something that did not happen under the Organization of African Unity. That's progress. In terms of peace and security, the AU architecture now includes fairly innovative structures for peacemaking and peacekeeping, even peace building. We have the Peace and Security Council. We have an African Standby Force. All these are important developments towards the original vision, which saw Africa having capacity to have its own army. In terms of the original vision of a continental economic planning system that would see Africa face the rest of the world as one economic force, now was established initially the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NAPAD, which has since been transformed into a much more solid agency of the AU, now named Africa Union Development Agency, NAPAD. This is a major milestone towards unified continental economic planning and development. The judicial framework of the AU and through the Constitutive Act provides for an African Court of Justice and Human Rights. It has a Pan-African Parliament based in Midrand in South Africa. All these are incredible improvements from the Organization of African Unity. And this third stage really, like I say, it takes us to the crossroads Are we going to go all the way through to see an Africa Union government, or we are still going to continue to struggle to figure out how Pan-Africanism and the original vision is going to be seen to be realized? So see you back shortly when we do an analysis of this evolution of Pan-Africanism and African unity. See you shortly. Thank you. Welcome back to the analysis on this issue of an introductory session on Pan-Africanism and African unity. So the first thing I'd like to bring to our attention in the analysis is to understand the nuances between Pan-Africanism and African unity. We use these interchangeably. We're talking about practically the same thing, but from a historical perspective, I would like to bring some nuances that are key in then how it affects the way forward. So Pan-Africanism definitely was crystallized in the diaspora and by great diaspora scholars, leaders, thought leaders who worked with African thought leaders, scholars, activists. And because no African country was independent at the time, Pan-Africanism came through clearly as a continental idea. It had no respect for the colonial borders. It saw Africa eventually as a unified, almost one country. So I want to put that on one side as opposed to to African unity, which is an idea which now comes as the practical reality of independence of each country is coming through. So you can visualize. I want you to really visualize that independence for Africa was happening one country at a time. It was not, oh, the colonial masters in Europe now believe the whole of Africa is free. It's one African country at a time. So each colonial master negotiate with each individual African country how independence was going to be handed over to them. There were issues, there were conditions, there were negotiations, there were agreements, how the relationship between the former colonizer and the newly independent country would continue to relate. Okay, and as you know, these were negotiated not just completely separately, country by country, but also each colonial master had its own style and its own needs, its own agenda. So Francophone African countries had to deal with France. Anglophone African countries had to deal with the UK. And the Lusophones had to deal with Portugal. So basically, now you have those individual, newly independent African countries and their leaders coming together with other leaders. And now they have to deal with the original notion of Pan-Africanism. And no doubt, the end result was each individual African country or leader had to go through not just what the agreement is with the former colonizers, but also the chances that they could immediately forge towards a Pan-African vision without first acknowledging that they're a former colony who now has a constitution and a living relationship with the former colonial master. I wanted to bring that nuance there because that is now the birth of the government-led organization of African unity was entirely driven by governments of former colonial masters. It was no longer diaspora, it was no longer intellectuals and non-governmental structures trying to put shape to it. Those were now peripheral. And as a result, we have to accept that the role that was played by non-governmental entities in the diaspora initially then really were diluted. They became less relevant after 1963. And also given that not only, so you could actually then say the weakness of the Organization of African Unity emanates in both spaces. Space number one is you've got some conditions, preconditions set for you by your former colonial masters. They still have interests in your country, political interests, economic interests. They are going to keep trying to pull you away from Africa as an idea and play more with the former colonial masters. I mean, I'm more familiar with the Anglophone because I'm from a formerly British colony. They created Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, so which is basically a way of saying we still have all of you under one wing, and it's more important. You're going to get more benefits politically, economically from the Commonwealth than from an African unity government. So you have that, and then of course you have the African government itself. Now you got newly independent governments, new heads of states, the trappings of power. Each one has to build their own state house. They have to go through their own notions of how you unify a nation, which was not really that united except by force under colonial rule. So when Kwame Nkrumah coined in his historic speech the desirability of a common foreign policy as one of the three key ingredients of a unified Africa, enabling Africans to speak with one voice all over the world, that could not survive the circumstances of an Organization of African Unity, which was just a conglomeration of newly independent states with so many forces shaping their foreign policy. One voice was not going to be easy. But I will literally read for you, because for me, as a novice and also a seeker and learner in African Pan-Africanism, I would like to read some snippets out of Kwame Nkrumah's 1958 statement on Pan-Africanism. Quote, "If we in Africa set up a unified economic planning organization and a unified military and defense strategy, it will be necessary for us to adopt a unified foreign policy and diplomacy. The burden of separate diplomatic representation by each state on the continent of Africa alone would be crushing, not to mention representation outside Africa. The desirability of a common foreign policy which will enable us to speak with one voice in the councils of the world is obvious, vital, and imperative that comment is hardly necessary," he said. Under a major political union of Africa, there would emerge a united Africa, he said, great and powerful, in which the territorial boundaries, which are the relics of colonialism, will become obsolete and superfluous. He concludes, "Herein is a challenge which destiny has thrown out to the leaders of Africa." Close quotes. That's Kwame Nkrumah, 1958. I mean, the clarity of vision. I don't argue about the practicalities which make it difficult. But the clarity of vision is what I'm talking about. It's as clear today as it was in 1958. So, but back to the Organization of African Unity, yeah, like I say, we can go through all the reasons why they abandoned the original Pan-Africanism. I mentioned following former colonial masters, still having to rely on the colonial systems left behind. But language then became language of the colonizer. Well, we still are today. Even at the Africa Union, we prioritize the former colonial master's language for communication. The Cold War in the 60s and 70s was just amazing. The world was divided between those supporting the United States and those that support the Soviet Union. That meant that of the 40-some African countries at the time, the United States could focus on which countries it wanted to control and then do it either through dictatorship or what the allegiance to democracy for the US was not as important as a country aligned to them. Same with the Soviet Union. It was more important to be aligned. And as a result, although African countries were decolonized, they really just paid lip service to the ideology of Pan-Africanism. And like say, Kwame Nkrumah's idea that a union government for Africa will ultimately be the most effective vehicle, not socially, politically, and economically. But under the cloak of sovereignty, non-interference or non-intervention, territorial integrity, a majority of African leaders fell for that one. And there was limited Pan-African solidarity really during the period of the OAU. There was limited economic interdependence. There was limited capacity to secure Africa and African nations. There was limited mutual accountability. However, the OAU was still a massive success when it came to the struggle against colonialism and racism. It worked tirelessly to ensure that each and every African country was decolonized all the way to the demise of apartheid in South Africa in 1994. Honestly, all the major criticisms that I hear on OAU wither away when I realize how resolute they were on decolonizing every country and fighting against racism. To me, that still says, yes, we can compromise on all other aspects of Pan-Africanism for now, but we are not going to compromise the idea that we are still Africans and every one of us ultimately has to be free and self-determination is going to come. So kudos to OAU in spite of all the other failures. So in this analysis, I still have a question around, okay, we've seen three stages. Stage one, where the diaspora before independence really led the Pan-Africanist movement. Then stage two was the OAU, and now stage three, we're in the AU. Are we going to see a fourth stage is the question. Now, if you just look at what has happened since the formation of the African Union in 2002, it didn't take time. By 2005, the AU had already started talking about where are we going to be with the Union Government of Africa. So in 2005, the agenda was on the table of the heads of states. And in 2005, the agenda to establish a union government of Africa was launched at the fourth ordinary session of the heads of states, a meeting held in Abuja, Nigeria, in 2005. And that fourth ordinary session actually established a committee led by President Obasanjo of Nigeria, former, a committee of heads of states to advise, to go and look at the desirability of a union government of Africa. So that was already done, and the committee reported back, and I must add that it was good to see that as the committee reported back, that meeting of the AU was not just heads of states. It included regional economic commissions, the technical experts and academics and civil society, as well as diaspora representatives. That was key. But what were the main conclusions coming out of the Obasanjo Committee's recommendations? Number one was the recognition that it was still necessary to have an African Union government. In fact, they used the word, that idea is not in any doubt. Secondly, that the union must go beyond governments, must be of the people, not merely a union of states and governments. And thirdly, that the creation of such a union government should come through the principle of gradual incrementalism, so that it cannot really just happen overnight. There's so many structural and institutional changes with the existing institutions that would be necessary. But fourthly, the recommendations added that the role of the regional economic blocs were a real key element in building the continental framework of a union government. The idea of a union government of Africa is still very much alive and on the agenda of the AU, and they've already set it in a way that the non-governmental structures, civil society, non-governmental structures, academics and scholars and thought leaders are needed to jump on this agenda. And that's why we at DWP are committed to this, given that AU really is working towards it. And in one of our subsequent sessions, we will definitely go deeper then into what's coming from this work in terms of setting out clear systems and structures towards it, a clear timetable for achieving this. We will come back in another session to deal with those things. So, having said that, this issue is alive. It's key in the way today we see not African unification alone, but Brand Africa, how we actually see the Africa Union as a key element in the Brand Africa I was talking about. And once again, it's a topic that's coming back in the DWP sessions. So for now, I'd say I'll leave the analysis at that and see you back shortly for conclusion. Welcome back. As we conclude on this matter of the evolution of Pan-Africanism and African unity and how it impacts on Africa brand and how we move forward with this agenda at DWP and other interested stakeholders. So DWP theme for 2022 still applies. Whoever controls Africa, who run this world, we actually have provided enough historic background for that. And therefore it follows when Africa, and as Africa controls its resources, its identity, its vision, when Africa Union translates the original vision of a union government, then Brand Africa will become clearer and clearer, and its value for African acts, for African systems, will just be enormous. So, Pan-Africanism and its ideals bang in the center towards Africans being able to provide African solutions to African problems. Answers lie within. It is okay, it is actually good to borrow and learn from other cultures and other societies if we do so intelligently. It is suicidal to just copy and paste. More importantly, it is brilliant when we find our own truths through experience. The truths that we co-create for ourselves is most transformative. And that is what constitutes the highest values towards African solutions to peace, prosperity, and freedom in advanced African society. So when we say modernize, don't westernize, we simply mean that Africans' interpretation of modernity cannot be the same as that of our former colonizers. So westernization by copying and pasting, or shall I say, for this just laziness, intellectual laziness, spiritual poverty, means that we are not able to break down and understand how our own systems of family, which were so strong and so advanced, our own systems of community, which had strong understanding of the environment and sustainability, self-governance, and economic systems which are highly sustainable. These, when they are tempered with in the name of westernization, have created a disillusionment and economic turmoil on the continent. And now it's clear from how the Asian tigers have figured out for themselves what to copy from the Western systems, what to rejuvenate for themselves. We are not going to escape that as Africans. The road to economic superpower, and by the way, it's only a couple of decades away, 2-3 decades. That road requires us to copy intelligently how the Westerners industrialized, and then how the Easterners, especially the tigers, figured out the differences that could not be copied from the Westerners, but had to be recrafted afresh. Africa is bang in the same space. The orthodoxy of Western industrialization and the unorthodoxy of ours, and the lessons from the tigers means that we can now apply our own uniquely African solutions to a more sustainable, a healthier industrialization process for Africa. And it is those products of a uniquely advanced African society which will bring freshness to the world. What I'm saying is literally, we cannot modernize Africa, especially its economy, just by copying and pasting anymore. We have to figure out which parts are uniquely African and cannot be copied. So Pan-Africanism ideals are central to Brand Afrika. And in conclusion, therefore, Brand Afrika should continue to reflect the ongoing unification of Africa, the original Pan-Africanist ideals. And that Brand Afrika will continue to exude high values. The brand should continue to exude Africa as the mother of the world, and that neither no one should be talking to us as a child, but rather as the mothers of civilization. Brand Africa should exude bravery. It should exude boldness, taken to everything that we produce, workmanship, our humanity. By the way, humanity today requires boldness because there's little people and entities out there who don't care. Family and community. In other words, Brand Africa, with its Pan-African ideals, should bring freshness, a fresh brand, fresh air to the world through its uplifting values of humanity. Thank you so much, and see you again at the next episode. Bye.